if you end a work session and then reopen and restart later and you're closing Photoshop, you can always go to File, Open Recent, and go back to the files you were working on. So I'm going to go ahead and just, it doesn't save that much time, but it makes it a little easier. Just go back and reopen our template from yesterday. Now I kind of have deleted what we did yesterday, but I think that you kind of remember. Remember, we basically were showing the difference between the different selection tools is where we left off. The difference between making a marquee selection versus a lasso selection, and then we were showing the difference between quick select and the magic wand. And we had, I had the Batman photo in here that we cut out and placed in the box, and we filled the boxes. So let's do a really, really brief, quick review of that, just so we kind of know where we're at. So, to fill a background, remember, always create a new layer. Always. And always duplicate your background layer. Remember, you want this template to exist on its own just by itself. You don't want to be putting any fills or anything else directly on this template layer. Why? Because you want this pristine for making selections on. All right, if I start filling this with color, and then all right, let me show you real quick what that looks like. I'm going to purposely mess this up so you see the problem here. I will go ahead and duplicate that. But let's say I just start willy-nilly getting the magic wand tool and filling things. Well, first of all, if I don't make a selection and I just say edit fill, watch what happens. It fills the entire thing. And you don't want that. And the reason why it did that is because we forgot to tell Photoshop, look, only fill it in this area. So it didn't know what else to do, so it just filled the entire thing. I can undo this. But now, let's fill it in a selection. But see, now it's directly on my background layer, my template layer. And I don't want that because later on, if I start putting other stuff on here and I want to go back and select and change it, I can't because it's going to start selecting the elements that I've placed on here instead of the template itself. Does that make sense? You want it to just select the shapes, the boundaries of each side of your box. You don't want it to start selecting what's inside of it. Right now, it's not that bad because I've got flat color here. So it's still going to read it as flat if I have the magic wand selected. But let's say I skip ahead a little bit and I go to the gradient tool and I accidentally fill these with a gradient. All right, now if I want to go back and try to select with the magic wand, watch what happens. See, it's only selecting within a certain range. And that's going to really make things hard for me later. So the best thing to do is to simply, I'll go ahead and delete this layer altogether and start over. Now I'll turn my background layer back on. See this? Because I had this duplicated, now I can go back to where I began, duplicate it again. What? Which button? Okay, here's the duplicate layer button. Go down here to your layers menu, down here in the corner. It's like, looks like 3 lines. Click on that, and it's right under here, duplicate layer. Just hit OK, and there it is. Well, do you have the layer selected? Well, something's there because it's. Well, bring it over here. Do you even have layers open? Right, because you don't have your layers menu open. You don't even have it there. You got to go Window, Layers. Yeah, there you go. Yep. Yeah, remember, folks, if your layers menu isn't open, then yeah, you're not going to see any of this stuff. So make sure you go up to Window and go Layers. Window, Layers, and that will show your. You got to have your layers menu open. It's very, very impossible to work in Photoshop without layers open. Okay? All right, so here's the tricky part that people struggle with at first, folks. Go to your background layer to make your selections. And this is something that even I forget to do. Before you do anything else, before you start adding your fills or whatever, your strokes, make your selections here, but then switch to your new layer before you actually put anything down. That way it'll place it on a new layer. Because remember, again, you don't want to put anything directly on this background copy. Leave it clean so that you can make selections easy. All right, so the first few times will be tricky, but try to get used to that habit of if you need to select something in terms of the borders, go back to the background, make your selection, then select whatever layer you're going to actually place the fill on. All right, so now I'm going to, because otherwise, if you just click on this layer 1, do you see how the dotted lines are going across the whole thing? That means that it's a blank layer and it's selecting the entire thing. So I'm going to go back to my background copy, hit Control D to deselect, and now I'm going to hold down Shift and click with the magic wand and select all 4 sides. Oh, I'll go ahead and do the bottom too. Okay, now I go back to layer 1, and then I do my edit fill. And as you can see in the little thumbnail for the layer now, all that color is on a separate layer, which is what I want. If I get the move tool now and use it, you see that? All my colors are on a separate layer, which is going to make it much easier for me if I decide to edit it later. I could just turn off that whole layer or delete the whole thing and make a new one if I choose to. All right. And then we had another quick review. Remember our Batman character. Let's open him up in a separate window. Remember yesterday we talked about how the images are anchored to the top, so they'll only display one at a time. And if you want to have floating windows, just click and drag it down a little bit, and you can have overlapping windows. All right, remember we talked about there's 2 ways you can bring this guy over here. You can either just get the move tool and drag him straight on like that, or you can do Control A to select all, Control C to copy, then go over to your box and hit Control V to paste. And there he is. And remember we talked about why he looks so small in this box, because his resolution is smaller than the box. So even though it looked big in the window, he looks small on the box. If we want to scale him up, we go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and we can also rotate, skew, distort, whatever in this as well. We can also flip horizontal or vertical, so you can mirror things if you want to. But we're going to go scale. You'll see your little anchor points show up in the corners. Hold down Shift as you click and drag to constrain the proportions. Remember, it will look choppy on the inside until you actually hit Enter. Hit Enter. There you go. Now, if we want to get rid of the white space around Batman, again, get the Magic Wand tool. Hold down Shift and click all the white space that you see. Now, in my case, I'm zoomed in a little far, so I'm going to go in a little closer by holding down Control-Alt+ to zoom in and Control-Alt- to zoom out. This is going to make clicking a little easier. Get all the white space, and then just hit the Delete key. And now I have a clean selection. And remember, the only reason why that was so easy with the Magic Wand was because he was behind a flat color. Flat color makes it easy. And then we had the Robin image opened up. So let's open that. I believe it was this one with all the crazy numbers and letters on it. Yep, there we go. Now, the one thing that I did not do yesterday, which I should have done, and I will rectify that now, is this image, because it's from a poor screenshot, it's kind of dark. So I want to lighten this up a little bit. So if you go up to Image, the Image menu, and go to Adjustments, you'll see a whole long list of options. I'm going to go to Levels. When you click on Levels, you'll see something called a histogram. That's what this is called, this little graph. And this refers to all the light and dark pixels in any image, selected image. And you're going to see three triangles here, a dark one, a gray one, and a white one. All right, each of these controls different the darkness levels of pixels in the image. Now you can just click Auto and watch what happens to these three triangles. It moves them a little bit, and see how much brighter the image is now just from doing Auto. If you want, you can go in and manually drag these further, but the danger is if you go too far in any direction, your image is going to be all washed out and it's not going to look very good. So just go easy with this. This image is a little more forgiving because it's like, animation and it's stylized. If this were a photograph, you would have more issues with it. So there, I lightened it up a little bit. Now it's easier for me to tell the background from the foreground. Now, remember yesterday, the quandary was we want to get Robin isolated from the background, and we can't use the Magic Wand because if we try to select stuff, you see all these little holes and patches of stuff? I mean, I could sit here and hold down Shift for 10 minutes until everything was selected, but that would be a big waste of my time, and it would be very frustrating. So instead, we're going to switch to that quick selection tool right here. It's bundled with the wand. And if I just start clicking and dragging, you see how the selection gradually starts to grow. It starts to move with my cursor. And I don't have to keep clicking. I don't have to keep making individual clicks. I can just slowly select. It's in that folder that I told you guys to copy over. Yeah. Well, there's 2 of them in there. Look and see. I could have sworn it was in there. I'll look again in a minute. Just for now, watch what I'm doing. All right, so see, I'm gradually selecting everything. Now, the default mode for this tool is additive, meaning wherever I click, it's going to add, it's going to grow the selection. It's going to add the selection. However, if I go too far and I want to subtract a little bit, all I have to do is hold down the Alt key and watch what happens. If you look inside the cursor, you see a little plus symbol. When I hold down Alt, it turns to a minus, and that means I can actually go in and take away from the selection. And to bring it back to additive again, I just simply let go of Alt. So once I have gotten as much of this as I can, I can bring it over. But before I do, there's one thing I want to do. Some of the edges of this selection are going to look pretty rough, like kind of choppy, not clean. Now, there's a couple of ways that I can clean up and smooth up the edges. And the other thing I mentioned yesterday, before I get into that, is remember you can combine selection tools. So let's say I've got like the edge of his neck here, and every time I try to use the quick select, it doesn't give me a clean edge to go by. I can switch over to my polygonal lasso, let's say, hold down Shift, and just select the edges I want and go straight down like that. Go inside, come around, come back to where I started, and you'll know, because the little cursor changes from a plus to a circle, and now I've got a much cleaner edge on the neck because I, combined my selection tools. All right, so once you get this pretty close to how you want it, you're going to want to go in and clean up the edges a little bit more. So the way to do that easy is to go to the select menu and go to refine edge. And what that does is, you see how it isolates the rest of the background? And it only shows you what you have selected. And it makes it easier to go in and look and see, okay, some of these edges are pretty smooth, but some of them look kind of rough and choppy. So now I can go in and use these sliders here, like smooth. And it's subtle, but you can go in and see how it's smoothing up the edges. I can go to contrast, which gives me a bolder edge on the selection. And I can go to shift edge, and I can actually bring the selection out by a certain number of pixels. So you see how now it's starting to capture some of the dark outlines? Look on the arm here. If I take it the other way, it goes inward, and it, cuts into the figure a little bit. So something like that is decent. All right, and then once I have something I'm pretty happy with, and make sure it says output to selection, because when I hit OK, it's going to go back to, and see, now my selection is a lot cleaner, a lot smoother, just from using again, it's select refine edge tool, Alt Control R. Now that he's selected and he's cleaned up, now I can go Control C, copy, go back to my box, Control V, paste. And there he is. And now I can scale him up. I can put him behind something. Since his legs are cut off, I'm probably going to want to put something either in front of his legs or have him on the bottom of the box, kind of cropped. Again, I can go back to Edit, Transform, Scale, and make him a little bit larger if I want to. If we have time, yes. Some years we have had the time to print them out and cut them out and assemble them, and other years we haven't. Yes. Yep. Well, do you have a selection active in your image? It's not going to look like that. You're going to want to go up to select, up to the select menu, and go to it's select and then select and mask. Click select and mask. And then it will do the same thing, except now the sliders will be over on the right-hand side of your screen. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. Thank you, Jack. All right, I was not aware that, see that Photoshop's great, but the one frustration is that whenever, yeah, Adobe just loves to just change things for no good reason, at least in my opinion. Like sometimes it'll just move a menu, it'll just change the name of a menu or just make it look different so that you can't find it. It's still there somewhere, but you got to hunt for it, and it's just really frustrating. You just want it to work like it always has, and you know. So go to select and mask to do what I just did with this. All right. Sorry about that. I was not aware that that change had existed. So, okay, moving on. All right, so we've pretty much done the selection tools and the move tool, and we started to get into edit, transform, and a little bit into image adjustments. So let's continue moving down the toolbar here. This next one is the crop tool. This simply crops your image to a new size. If you select it, you click and drag, and it looks like a normal selection, except what it's actually doing is it's going to crop, it's going to resize the image to whatever your selection is marked at. So if I were to hit enter right now, like this, see now it's cropped my image to that, and I don't want that. So I'm going to undo it. But anyway, that's what the crop tool does. You don't really have a need for it. But if that happens, if you click it accidentally and use it, that's just undo it because it's just resizing your image. All right, the next tool is the eyedropper tool right here. This samples color. Now, I believe yesterday I mentioned down here in the corner are your two foreground and background colors. And if you click this little curved arrow, you can switch back and forth between them. So right now I have blue as my foreground color. So whenever I do a fill and it's set to foreground, that's the color it gives me. If I want to change it, I can either click on one of these swatches up here, or I can double click on the foreground color itself, double click, and it brings up my color picker, and I can use the sliders to select a new color. Now these numbers down here are the RGB, CMYK, etc. values. This is mostly used for printing. Like if you were doing art for publication and you were going to print something, you would probably want to use CMYK values. If you're doing something for digital art, for like a website or something, you'd probably want to use RGB. All right. So that's all that means. And notice how the values change. The reason why we have these is to identify colors. Like let's say you're a graphic designer and you have a client and they want specific colors used. All right, but you can't say, well, I want the cover of this leaflet to be light blue. All right, but there's like hundreds of variations of a light blue. You want a warm blue? Do you want a cool blue? You know, so that's not enough. By using these numerical values, you can actually tell someone specifically, I want this color blue and I want it to be RGB, you know, R is this number, G is this color, B is this number. And that way they can find the exact, you can punch these numbers in and it'll take you to the exact color that you want. And there's no room for error. All right. So the color picker, all that really does, the eyedropper rather, is it will sample colors from any image. So let's say I've got a photograph and I really like the color green in that photograph, but I don't know what the RGB values of it is. Then I will simply get my eyedropper tool and click. Watch what happens down here to my foreground color when I start clicking. See? It is changing my foreground color to whatever it is I'm clicking on. The bottom half of the circle is what I currently have selected. And then the upper part that keeps changing, that's the part that is updating. So no matter where I hover, as long as I have the left mouse button clicked, it's changing my color. So that's the color picker. You can sample colors, and that way you can get your colors to match up. It's a very handy tool. What I use it for a lot when I draw when I'm coloring my comics, and I want a natural palette for things, and I don't want to just use, you know, garish colors. I will actually get a photograph, and I will, you know, of a certain scene, like a night scene or something, and I'll actually click on the colors within the photograph and make a natural palette for myself. You can actually make your own palettes in Photoshop and save swatches, and it's really helpful that way. So that's the eyedropper. All right, next one down on the toolbar, at least on my toolbar. And again, if any of this is different for you guys, speak up. The healing brush, you don't really need to worry about that. The red eye tool, that just kind of takes red eye out of photographs. This is more for photographer stuff than what we're doing. So you don't need to worry too much about crop or the healing brush for this assignment. Next down, you've got the brush and pencil tool. All right, the brush tool gives you a soft edge. Let me create a new layer and show you what I mean. And again, you can control the cursor with the bracket keys that are next to the P key. Left bracket makes it smaller, right bracket makes it larger. See how soft that edge is when I have that yellow selected? That's because I've got the brush tool selected. Now, if you go up here, do that, the options bar, remember I mentioned yesterday, see how that changes depending on what tool I have selected? If I go up here and click, this gives me some different brush sizes to work with. Now, what I have done in the past is I've actually made brushes. You can make your own brush. Like, for example, I made a Batman brush. It's kind of fun to make brushes. You don't really need to use it for this. It's just kind of a fun little thing. In order to make a brush, you need to go to an image that actually has some good contrast in it. This is actually, I've already got this selected, so I'm going to use this. Select whatever it is that you want to make the brush of. Go to Edit, and then go down to Define Brush Preset. And you can name it whatever you want. I'll call it Robin. Hit OK. And now it has made a brush of that selection. And the higher contrast the image, the better it'll look. All right, so even though it displays as kind of a silhouette, let me switch to a darker color. See there? It's not really useful when you click and drag it, but it almost works like a stamp. You just click one time and there it is. And it changes color. Like right now I have black selected, so it looks like that, but I could change it to red. Whatever. Anyway, just a fun little thing. It's nothing you're going to have to know how to do, but if you want to, it's. I'm going to undo this here. Whoops, I went too far. Sorry about that. This is me just using step backward and step forward because I went crazy with my undos and I went back too far. All right, I think that's where I was. Okay. Now, the other tool bundled with the brush tool is the pencil tool, which works the same way pretty much, except where I had soft edges with the brush, now I've got crisp edges. All right, so if you don't want that fuzzy blended edge, that's what the pencil tool does. And again, if you want more options for this, go to Window and open up Brush or Brush Presets, and you'll get all kinds of extra style things and controls, and you can control the scattering and the texture of the brush and the color dynamics. This again is more for doing higher level stuff than what we're going to be doing. But if you're a process nerd, kind of like I am, and you like learning about this stuff, you can go in and play around with it. All right, go to Window. And remember, this is where we did the layers and stuff. You can open up the brush menu, and that's where all that stuff is. Okay? But I don't have it open normally because it's not something that I use a lot for this kind of assignment. All right, so moving on. Yeah, the brush stuff again is you find an image, you make a selection, and then you go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. And then it'll create a brush for you based on the selection. All right, the clone stamp. This is a fun one. The clone stamp tool will take any part of an image and clone it to another part of your image. So let's open up a different file. Let's go to this one.
Good morning. Please stand for the prayer and the pledge. Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, may we see you in every person, the sick, the suffering, the broken, the outcast.
Let's see if we have time to get through the clone stamp before the bell rings. We've got about 8 minutes. I think we can do it. Okay. Now the clone stamp, like I said, will replicate one part of an image in another part of an image by kind of painting it. So it's a little tricky to figure out at first, but it doesn't take long. All right. So I've got my clone stamp selected. I'm going to, make sure that I've got my cursor a little bit larger than I need it, something like that, because you want a big enough area to sample from. Now watch the cursor. When I hold down the Alt key, you see how it changes to that little crosshairs, targeting crosshairs? If I left click anywhere in this image, like right here, and let go, watch what happens. Now Batman's, the area I clicked, which in this case is Batman's head, is in the cursor. That means that it is actively going to start painting and replicating from that area. Now, let's say I want to do something goofy, like I want to make Batman's head be on Blue Beetle's body. I could try to cut it out and just paste it on. That's one way to do it. The other way is to use this clone stamp. So I've got this sampled from here. Now if I click and just start the paint, all right, the problem here, hold on. My opacity of the tool is set at 62%. I'll take it up to 100. That's why it wasn't looking quite right. See that? Now it's sampling from other parts. So it's replicating this area. If I make my thing a little smaller and resample it, I can have a little more control over it. So I can start going in, and this tool is used a lot for, if you're trying to touch up photos, like you're trying to take out, like in fashion photography, when they want to go in and start airbrushing people's faces to take out pimples or beauty marks or whatever, they use the clone stamp tool a lot to go in and sample from other parts of the photo and get rid of it. Okay? So it's kind of fun. And you can, get really clever with it once you get more control with it and, have, like, let's say you have like, a field and you have like one rock and you want to put more rocks in the field. You can use this to sample and make it look like there's more rocks or more blades of grass or what have you. Let me pick another image. No, do not save changes to that. There's another one with Spider-Man on it that I thought I had in here. It must be in a different folder. Yeah, it's a different folder. Anyway, that's how that works. I'll have to find the other one later. All right, any questions on the clone stamp? Nope, okay. All right. The next tool down is, I believe this is the history brush. You don't really need to know this one for what we're doing, so you can ignore that for now. The next one is the eraser tool. The eraser is pretty straightforward. It does exactly what you think it does. It just erases stuff. Like right now I'm on the Robin layer. If I just take the eraser tool, it's just erasing. The handy thing that this does, though, is that if you play with the opacity, if you take the opacity right here down on the eraser tool, or any tool really, you can start to like fade edges and stuff and get some soft kind of effects, you know, like that. So that's the eraser tool in a brief nutshell. Okay, we will stop this for today. Made some decent progress for a short period. Tomorrow we will continue working our way down the toolbar, and we'll talk more about layers and blending options and stuff like that. Okay?